Welcome to the Spiritual Geek Podcast, Wisdom for Modern Times, where we focus on living with intention to consciously create a life you love and celebrate. I'm your spiritual geek, Sheila Franzen, and I'm so excited to share another episode with you. Today we have Jeannine with us, and we're going to talk about past lives and how they are interwoven into our day-to-day world. For over 23 years, Jeannine has been offering healing wisdom and guidance to clients worldwide as an intuitive reader, 5D astrologer, medium, HHP, yogi teacher, and author. Her main passion is supporting others in their evolutionary journey with sustainable, deep, whole self transformation and intuitive becoming. So welcome, Jeannine. It's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Sheila.
And is there anything else you would like to share about yourself as an introduction as we get started here?
Nope, I think you just about covered it. Thank you.
Well, that means you did an awesome job of writing your bio. So thank you.
Sure.
All right. So we're going to talk about past lives today. And this is a topic that I have been fascinated with for, I think my first learning about the fact that we had past lives came from this concept of someone sharing what the Akashic records were. And maybe even a little before that, you know, the longer we live on this planet, some of our memories from our early learning seem to get scrambled for me. You know, I was curious about this concept of extraterrestrial and these other worldly things. And I remember reading the Seth material and kind of this being from, you know, Seth, you know, talking to us from the other side. But I think my first really deep understanding of past lives came in the Akashic records, because when you have an Akashic record reading and you ask a question, somewhere there's always an answer that relates to a past life. And that really sparked my interest of, you know, 10 plus years in the Akashic records, and then finding other healers everywhere I could find them that did past life healing work, whether it was somatics in the body and yeah, just anything, anywhere anybody was talking about past lives, right? Past life readings.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Just totally fascinated by it. So I'm curious, before we dive into past lives, where did past lives originate for you? How did you learn about past lives?
That's a great question. Well, coming from the south side of Chicago, Catholic upbringing, it certainly didn't come from there. And I was pretty steeped in the religion and the Catholicism, which I completely appreciate. It gave me an awesome foundation on many levels. But, you know, it's funny, I've been asked this question before, and I don't recall how it kind of floated into my awareness. I mean, again, you and I were chatting before the session, being a child born in the late 60s and in the 70s and 80s, it wasn't like it was spoken about in that way. But I always would carry it around like as a little joke, like, oh, I'm so good at this. I must have been like this in my past life. And so it was just, I don't even know where that came from. But once I started moving into my 20s, it really started to kick in. And I feel like deep diving into my spiritual work in the 90s really brought that forth for me, brought that forward. And it was Shirley MacLaine. I've read every one of her books, you know, Gary Zukav, Seed of the Soul, and just Andrew Weil. Like these are the people that I learned from before Google. Like I know I've been working professionally with people since 1999, but prior to that, I was really deep on my journey in the 90s, well before Google, at least Google in my world.
Right. Well, no, I think it was Google in the world, right? Like,
oh, good. Okay. Yeah. I'm not
there.
quite sure when they happened, but but it was all these delicious books. Right. And then I fell upon Buddhism, and that, of course, and my yoga practice I began in my early 90s consciously, and all those cultures for me, I'm like, they feel more true to me than what I was raised in. And they spoke of these past lives as well.
Yeah, Google, just for the record, was started in 98. I had to look it up. So, you know, you were definitely before Google there. We all had to read books then to learn.
Yeah, actual books. Right.
I spend the Saturday evenings in the library and the, book section of Barnes and
Barnes and
Noble. And I
Noble.
can't think of the other major bookstore that
Yep.
was the other one, although I don't even know if it's still around. So yeah, I spent a lot of years in Buddhism and reading all of Buddhism and Sikhism and Hinduism and like all the religions of the world, just wanting to understand all of how the weaving of past lives came in and out of that. And I'm actually reminded I grew up very conservative Christian environment, probably felt like Catholicism. I mean,
yes,
it's all the stories that we are given that
right.
Unfortunately, we didn't have anybody to interpret the beautiful stories that actually exist in the Bible. There's vast knowledge and wisdom in there, but it was all interpreted in this very wrong way. I mean, or maybe unfortunate way. I don't want to use the word wrong, but
right. The context of the times, right?
Yes, not in a way that, I think if people understood how many times the Bible has been translated to become the words of the translator versus the origin of the meaning, we would have a different perspective on the Bible. But I am reminded, we recorded an episode recently, and Carol Ann Halstead in the book Modern Ascension that we spoke about has just a little paragraph, and it was like a moment of reminding me, rebirth and reincarnation, she writes, are concepts that are part of the ancient teachings of religions, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, Hinduism. And although these concepts were part of the teachings of the early Christian church, they were expunged from church doctrine during the 6th century. Yep. Because of this, Christianity has lost the fundamental truth about the purpose of our existence and hasn't recovered. Understanding the purpose of reincarnation is germane to understanding the process of ascension, which is what that book is about. But it's that part of now we come into like, what is a past life? And understanding that if we're talking about past lives, or are willing to listen to an episode on past lives, there's some part of you that has an inner knowing that knows this isn't the only life you've lived, right? We've lived, if you can talk about it, you understand we've lived hundreds and most of us thousands of lives that are having these conversations. Right. And it's a time of awakening on the planet, and to understand the influence and impact of our past lives makes life easier, I think. So I would, how do you try to describe what, this concept to people of past lives? Where do you start? How do you describe it?
Awesome. I love that. Well, the way that I bring it forth is that there's a couple of ways. First of all, if people are open to it, well, if they are and if they're not, I always love to begin by saying everything is energy first. And this is very much it's not just a spiritualism, but it's scientific as well. I work with a gentleman. He's a scientist. He scans my brain. We've done some retreats together. I was lucky enough to be in his book. It's called Becoming Psychic by Dr. Jeffrey Tarrant. And him and I, our common ground, he's a scientist, I'm a psychic, is that everything is energy first. And so when we look at it from that perspective, for those that, that are open to the concept of past lives, we can see that the energy that we were formed as, that we chose to really accentuate certain aspects of the energy and downplay some others, or, bring in certain traumas, have some masteries, that was all given to us, chosen by us at birth. And we could see that very much in the birth chart, because I'm an astrologer as well. Now, on top of that, say, for instance, you don't really like the word past life, kind of rubs you the wrong way. And I get it. I welcome that as well. What I love to say is that because everything is energy first, and we're not necessarily utilitarian blobs of biology, right? when we're born, you could see it in the children, or the puppies or whatever. Everybody's a little different, right? So something is affecting the energetics. And so when we choose a family, law of attraction is not just this thing we do with our mind. To me, it's a default mode. And so when we have our energetic imprint, we align perfectly with the family. And so for you and I who understand past lives, we could say our past life stories match the family stories. And for people who don't want the word past lives, we just say, or, our energy matches the family line perfectly. And so with that, those stories become reignited, where we left off, what we need to still work on, what our strengths are. We see it in the family line, but past lives and ancestry, they meet at a crossroad. And so I try to start there just to let them know that it's what we bring with us. It's a continuum of something greater.
Yes. The journey of the soul is a perpetual continuum. So yes. I love that you ended with that word there. It's a great way to look at it, because when you bring yourself into self-awareness and the concept that everything is energy, which the previous episode, if people listen to this order, is going to have been about energy healing. And so we talked a lot about everything being energy with energy healing, but everything has this vibration and on a continuum. And so when we talk about past lives and this concept of soul, right, related to past lives, there's a connection, right? That's our connection is an aspect of the energy, along with how that then is brought forth into form. And the adage of we're, spiritual beings living a human experience. It's that understanding that the spiritual being has had many human experiences. I mean, that's really in its simplicity what we're talking about, because past lives, the ancestry that connects, it's all an aspect of the energy of our soul, is what I keep hearing right now, right? The aspects of the soul consciousness. And, even Christianity, you take every religion, there's this aspect of soul, right? Aspect of how is that connected in, and how do we find that presence within ourselves? So, yeah.
I love that. I have to say, I wrote something down. It's one of my favorite sayings that, we are spiritual beings having a human experience. And yet I love to twist that on its head and play with this concept that being human is the most spiritual thing we can do.
Yes.
And a lot of people don't feel that way. And that's all right. But it's almost like saying that the roots of a flower have nothing to do with the beautiful flower on top of the ground. But yet, if you have a sick tree, there's something's going wrong, you don't just take a look at the leaves and spray the leaves. You need to get systemically into the dirt, underneath the surface, into that subconscious realm. And, being a healer, holistic health practitioner, and just, into this type of work, my own healing and just the professional work that I do, you come to know that I think there's a saying in psychology, 90 to 95% of what we make manifest in this world comes from our subconscious realm. And I just say, well, then let's go there first. I mean, I'm in. I'm like, what are we doing? Just looking at
exactly.
What we see. And don't get me wrong. I love all the facets of healing that are available. The herbs, the journey work, the walking on the rocks, like doing all, I love, it's a part of the plan. But when we go deeper and step into the stuff that is unseen, then the rest of the system, the rest of the flower functions properly.
Well, and I think that, like, when we can bring ourselves back to the beauty of what nature, right, can show us and teach us,
always
using the reference of flowers, like there's so many echoing principles that are on this planet that can teach us from, everything from the flowers to the trees to the ocean to, the blade of grass and the mustard seed story in the Bible.
Mustard seed, yep.
The mustard seed, you can move mountains or something along those lines. But this aspect of the unseen, I think that's the word that was kind of screaming out to me right there, because that's the part that makes it a little bit hard, I think, for people to connect into this concept of I have a past life and it can affect me now. I can't see that, right? Because I think in our continual cycles of humanity and some of our patterns in humanity, we're definitely awakening and returning to this self-empowerment and process of understanding ourselves. But not everyone does see, right? I mean, that's the gifts of, I'm sure you must see and hear as part of how you're able to communicate so much and channel. And there are many people out there in the world today that those gifts are returning, and it gives them the ability to bring what feels more concrete or what feels more real when somebody can actually have experiences of seeing a past life you've had, or, in the Akashic records, hearing and seeing, or, whatever the methods are that everybody works. It takes this aspect of the unseen and it brings it in via our language and our words and our stories that makes it real, right? Like I think of all the past life interactions I've had with, now with my own intuition and gifts, I actually do have moments where I don't necessarily see it, but I get clarity of just, oh, that had to be a past life related to this or to that. And occasionally I do see it, just not very often. Yet I think I remember embarking on this journey of past lives, I was just in awe and fascinated with people that could give me and provide me some kind of context of explaining I remember I'd had a friend who was really good at the Akashic records. And when I was in resistance to something, or some relationship wasn't working out, or some aspect of my life was just, not moving forward, I'd always be like, okay, what am I missing? And it'd always be a past life. Oh, right. It'd either be a past life with that person, or a past life with a similar circumstance, or a past life with an ancestor, or past life something, somehow, some way. And their ability to bring the unseen, right? And even the unknown, the subconscious, not that they were, it's my desire and my willingness that allowed them to have information shared with them, right? Like I always kind of desire, and our own intention is part of where that comes forth, because as soon as I have desire and intention to know a past life or to know what healing is, it's like giving permission for the universe to show up and share it, right? And yeah, that aspect of bringing things from the unseen to the seen, I think, is a really interesting aspect of trying to understand past lives.
It really is. And I feel like, well, a couple things here. You said some really amazing things that I want to kind of point out is pertinent to this type of work, is that when we really step into ourselves as a whole being, and we step into what that means in regards to an essence. In other words, we have the soul, right? But then we have the 4 bodies. This is what I call it. Your bodies are your babies. And I also learned this through my study of traditional Chinese medicine and all the other holistic work I've done, but I bring this forth now in my own way. And it's, your spiritual body is first, then your mental body, then your emotional body. Keeping in mind, those are all pretty etheric, right? Spirit, mental, emotional.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they are working their stuff and they all come together, they form the physical. And the physical is the final product, right? Is the holograph version, the most dense form of the other 3. And, we all say the word somatic experience, but yet most times people will either separate the mind or the body from one another, right? And it's like but yet it's that oneness thing. Now let me take it a little farther. The spirit body and the mental body, they're all masculine in nature, or I like to say the word yang. So not to bring in like a gender, because that has nothing to do with it, but a yang energy. And then the emotional body and the physical body are more yin, right? So that feminine component. And so here we are we're now really going to be moving into a space of mind energy. The Aquarian age is mind energy. It is spirit. It is air. Jupiter is going into Gemini. That's big mental energy. Uranus is going to be stepping into Gemini for like 8 years. That's going to be big mental energy. So we're going to have big yang forces, and mental energy means I know. So what we want to make friends with is the I don't know. And that's not spirit, because that's will, that's determination as well. And sometimes people could bring ego into spirit. You probably have seen this, like I call it egoic spirituality, where it's like the beliefs are dogmatic, and that's okay. You know, we have a blueprint, but we're trying to shake it. So instead, I always love to lean on Bruce Lee, where he says, don't think, feel. And, but feeling something, not knowing where it comes from, or the body asking for something and us telling it to be quiet. We got to keep going, or whatever the case is. That's the feminine. That's the mystic. That's the mystery. That is the unknown. And so only until we really can begin to lean in, each one of us, to the yin within us, whether you're whatever you are, we have the yin and the yang. When we can lean into the unknown of the emotional component of the physical body, when it does ask for this or that, then we could start to really begin to form our connection to spirit, like trust the impulses that come up through us and see where they take us, because they're coming from somewhere. Typically a past. Typically a past. Yeah.
Yeah. And that somewhere, I mean, that's what we're talking about with the unseen. It's what we're talking about in an aspect of soul, because soul knows our past lives, right? So we can, you know, it's an aspect of energy that is recorded and remembered. Like I remember early, and I can't remember where I first learned this concept that, you know, like behind our sternum is that place energetically where soul is housed, right? Like that was one language. And then, you know, there's the language of our soul and the aspect of our holy heart and our sacred heart that I've learned in the work around ascension that I've done. And, you know, lots of traditions, we come back to the heart, right? And we come back to these ways that we can connect in and lean into those aspects of the unknown and the seen. But the part that was always missing for me, and it's kind of shining in my awareness right now to share it. So I'm going to explain it in at least one set of information that I've learned was, well, how are past lives carried down? Like we talk about past lives, but like there was the part of me, your scientist friend, like, okay, well, but how does that actually work in our energetic systems? Like, you know, we have a past life and we leave Earth as soul and we come back with the energy of our past lives. And in the work that I've done with the Ascended Masters through the Ascended Masters portal with alphaimaging.co.nz, Verna and through the, you know, the Ascended Masters share through Verna as a channel that we have what they refer to as an Earth star, is a language that they use. And that Earth star is actually something, once you've incarnated on Earth, that Mother Earth, in her beautiful energetics of we're all being connected, when we are first incarnated on Earth, that Earth star is created. And then when we leave Earth, and Earth holds our Earth star until we return, and then that Earth star is returned to us. And whether that's an analogy or actually what happens, like I tend to, it feels really true for me at this point, but it works from an explanation of this aspect of these energies that are carried forth from, you know, we have the aspect of the energies of the ancestral line that are literally physically, scientifically carried in the energetics of conception through, you know, the divine spark and the aspects of literally physical cellular structures, right? We have that aspect of heredity that plays in, but the aspects of the energetic of the soul and past lives, like they're always with us. And then that aspect is why we still have to deal with them, right? We don't, like, whatever we've trauma or karma or any number of things that come through in past lives that wasn't completely resolved, I guess is kind of how I think about it. Be interesting how you would language it, but like there's something left that's not yet reconciled or understood or in harmony. And that carries forward. And that's an aspect of how we can have all this stuff with us, particularly when we've lived so many lives, that you start to, at sometimes it's just like you try to find meaning out of this life and make sense out of it. And I know the more sensitive I became, there was a period of time that it was like, it got harder. It definitely got harder before it got easier, because there was, a number of, that soul's journey. And then maybe that was the dark night of the soul. It feels like it.
Right.
You have to go through the really hard times and the releasing and the understanding. And then it gets a lot easier and a lot freer, because you've kind of hit that tipping point. You've worked through at least a number for this life that you need to work through that allows you to come back to the fun and the joy that's available in being human on this planet. So yeah, I don't know. How do you think about the energy of past lives? People describe it in so many ways of how it comes forward.
Well, the Earth Star chakra, I use that in my work all the time. And I have a Into the Mystic program. It's a one-on-one mentoring system that is all about acknowledging the core wound. I've formulated it a certain way that I get to the heart of each of the traumas within our systems, our main core systems. And the Earth Star chakra, for me, is a massive piece of that, for starters. And I love to call the Earth Star chakra Tom Cruise, Mission Impossible, the locker at the international airport. The one that he's got like all the disguises and all the different passports.
That's awesome.
And all the different money. And so when he's ready to, when he hits boots to the ground and he's ready for a new mission, he's accepted, he goes there. And all the information's going to be there. What he needs to take him forward for that story is going to take him there. And for me, that Earth Star chakra sits right below the first. And so it is embedded, but I see it again. I know that there's like a physical density that the earth plane has, but the way I love for people to start shifting their perspective is to look at it like a frequency. And so when we want to get really good at something or get to the core or to the root of it or go deep, we come to this density, this frequency density, and it makes it so. It makes it, it's really like where we're at is such a microscopic mastery. It's a microscopic mastery because it's so dense that, these, and another thing I want to say with these past lives is that pretend like, and I used to teach yoga in the early 2000s in California and a little bit here in Santa Fe where I currently live as well. But if I was in a room and I had somebody who's a new yogi and somebody who's been doing this for a long time, and I plug my ears and I tell them to go and do a forward bend and get to their edge. If my eyes are closed, I'm sorry, not plug my ears. I'm leaving my ears wide open. If my eyes are closed, it would sound the same. The edge would sound the same. Maybe a little more resistance from the newbie and less resistance from the yogi, because the seasoned yogi, most times, even though they may not like the pose, believe me, I've been doing yoga from a very early age and consciously since the 90s. And you take me to that back bend, I'm like, oh God, here we go. And so, I'm still a little resistant, but, for the most part, the seasoned yogi looks for the edge, where the newbie would say, okay, I touched my toes. And then next class, I'm like, hey, it's touch your toes time. How come you're not doing it? And they're like, well, I did it last time. It's like, no, no, we don't stop. The edge doesn't stop. And so again, to me, it's not so much a hierarchy. And I even feel oftentimes my perspective is that it could be a very heavy on our own person misnomer to believe a hierarchical thing. Like once we get spiritual, I'm going to be smiling all the time. And no.
Nope.
No. I call it, I know I'm getting off track a little bit. You'll appreciate this. It's, excuse me, like a spiritual sommelier. That's what I call it. And you know what a sommelier is? Do you know? You know what that is? Okay. So for those who don't know, the sommelier tastes wine. They're master tasters. And they could sip the wine and they're like, ooh, France, 1973. It was raining, bunnies everywhere. I'm like, what are they picking up? Like cherry, oak. I barely know if it's red or white. Like I'm lucky if I get out of there knowing the difference between those two. And so the mastery of these sommeliers, they are so refined in their palate, and that refinement just grows and grows and grows. But let me ask you, when it gets that good, you think they could tolerate like a box of Gallo with a keg top in their fridge? No. Somebody throw some ice cubes in there? No. They cannot tolerate it. And so I just say this because the spiritual journey, especially even with these past lives, is a continual state of refinement to the deepest, densest level here on the earth plane. So when we're kind of diving back in, going into that Earth Star chakra, picking up our mission, I feel like the soul wants a combination of these masteries to, like you said before, maybe there's some karma to be resolved, karma just being balance. So if you did something great, you're going to come get some of that too. You know, it's just a balancing and a continual, never ending evolutionary act. I mean, no, once you hit a back bend, you're not going to stop doing it. It's just, you might know how to do it different. You might, it's like a spice in a food. You may have mastered this in another life, but now you get to take it in another way. And I work with so many people, as a quick example, who have, they come in and they've been monks and Buddhas and blah, 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 and reached enlightenment and lived up in these mountains. I mean, it's written all over them, but there's some collateral damage to that our idealistic mind doesn't remember. It's like, really, how did they end up in that temple in the first place? Most time they were orphaned. They were not allowed to discuss their emotions. And so they come to me and we work on the collateral damage of that, because that needs to be reckoned with. This isn't about just reaching enlightenment and see you later. I mean, that concept for me does not hold true, especially as the earth is ascending, because we have a frequency now that could capture that frequency. But again, being human is the most spiritual thing we can do in the most dense form of our humanity on a daily basis, out of the temple. I had a teacher say to me once, we're getting out of the temple, moving into the trenches. This was like 20 some years ago. He's like, it's time to take that frequency and live this way.
Well, and I had the same thing in an Akashic record reading of like, you don't get to be a monk this lifetime, because there was a time in my 20s, I'm like, oh, yeah. I'm done. I'm going back to my monastery.
No. Give me
like,
the stream.
And they're like, nope, that's not this life. I'm like, oh.
Yeah, try to hold that calm space with a couple kids and
right.
and the news blaring in your face. Let's see if
Yeah, now try that.
Too easy.
And yes, I love that aspect of, because it's in this density that the density, it's hard. Like it's hard in this density, and it's the fastest, most powerful way to transform. Yeah. Like, you grow and change faster in physical form than you can in light form, because you have the resistance of the physical form. And that resistance is where, just like any life experience, in resistance, we find the most growth. And so like the journey is what the journey is. I think my experience is just at this point, the joy is so much deeper because you're in touch with the frequency of your soul. When you have cleared and reconciled and brought into harmony as many past lives and, your journey and your adventure, then life is richer, because the beauty of the human form is the beauty of the experience you get to have, whether it's the pain, the sorrow, the joy, the fun, the excitement, the appreciation. It's richer and deeper when you get to be more fully present.
Right. And I feel that the life for me and the experience with my clients is that the life keeps happening. And I really try to bring that forward to them. The end game is that there is no end game. And the first time you hear that, you're like, what? I have to keep doing this. But that's exactly, let's just rip that Band-Aid off, because once you come to know that, then you could center within yourself, because the current paradigm is about chasing the end, and that ain't working. That ain't working. And so what we get to do is realize that there is no end game. And it's just like the yogi that is the advanced yogi. It seeks the edge because it made friends with the edge, where the beginner yogi might be like, that class sucked. It was so freaking hard. I'm never doing that. That hurt so bad. I'm never doing it again. And it's because it was new. It's because it's the first time maybe they got to those sensations and were able to reprogram them with Ujjayi breath, if they were breathing at all. It's just like it was really feeling. Again, the emotional and the physical component, the feminine, the yin, the mystery. We say we want to embrace the divine feminine, and absolutely, we're rocking it. But the divine feminine isn't a concept. It's your feelings and your physicality. And how much do we listen to them? Because that is how we can all, like, I'm of the belief that every single one of us, it's our birthright to be psychic. Every one of us, it is our birthright to be psychic. And how we do that is coming back home to our body and listening to those emotions, asking where they're coming from. And they do come, they get re-triggered, reactivated from the stories, the family stories, most times earlier in the childhood. And then of course, as we get older, it continues. But that the roots of that are far beyond this time and space, far beyond. And I have, I get to these patches, and I work with a lot of clients where they burned off so much karma, and their soul's like, I'm rocking it. I'm keeping going. And again, the seasoned yogi, they're just like, bring it, because they realize that in the midst of crying and being upset and life sucks, and I've lost my religion a million times. I'm like, this is bogus. And then 2 days later, I'm back. I'm like, woohoo, I moved through that one. It's
right.
Like
exactly.
Really having a strong observer, like letting yourself be at the edge continuously, but consciously breathing into it.
Yeah. The intention of the edge of, and that, I think that's like, I'm hearing the word awakening, right? That's what the awakening is, right? Like when we live in the awakening, then we're always awakening to the next possibility, the next moment of healing, or the next just being willing to feel the depth of something. Because often if we're just willing to feel the depth of whatever it is, we have just now resolved something from a past life that we don't even know was there. And you don't even have to always know what the past lives are. I mean, I used to want to know all the stories,
Right.
I'd want to know the stories and give me all the details. And, there's a point now I realize that whatever details even somebody might have been sharing with me, whether they were all true or not, it was what it inspired in me that allowed me to find my path of understanding and healing, right? To allow me to move through that edge. And so, sometimes a past life story may or may not be the actual exact details. Like I attach way less to the details that any of the amazing psychic and gifted people in my life might have when I go to ask them, where am I stuck? But it's like, it just makes me go, that's what I need to let go of, or that's what I need to heal, or that's what I need to feel. And I think that's the incredible power of these interconnected aspects of our lives and our souls. Is it's one more tool, right? Like it can be, I don't think there's, well, I think past lives are probably one of the most powerful tools to actually create healing and moving forward in life. They're not the only ones, but it's definitely one of the most powerful tools that I have, definitely had on my journey trying to understand and explain things that didn't make sense, right? Overreactions that I have and behaviors that I can't reconcile. And it's like, it's just brought such a deep understanding to my own life personally to explore this aspect of our past lives.
I love that. I love that you said that, because deep is what it is. And it is really a foundational healing. And the way I like to reckon it is that instead of, finding necessarily, and it sounds like you had this experience as well, but finding tools to, let's say you have a boat with holes in it, right? Instead of just finding tons of fancy new tools and new buckets and new this and new that, just getting to the bottom of the boat, fixing the holes.
Right.
Then you're like, okay, I really don't need those other things, maybe on occasion. And the way I work with past lives is a little different. I don't do regressions per se, where I have the client do it themselves, or just prompt them. That's not how I work. And I go into each systemic center of your body, because each area, chakra, system has a different theme of a rooted story. And so we pull out the main theme, the main lifetime, and they get a name, they get a place. And within it, and I love what you said about this too, is I remind them that life is over. It's like a scavenger hunt. I don't know if you remember that, Sheila, when we were girls. I
love scavenger hunts.
I love scavenger hunts too. It's like a slumber party, and you got two groups, and somebody has to get the noodles and the toothpicks. And, once they get the noodles, you don't go for the noodles again. You know what I mean? You just let it go. And so I try to tell them it's over. And yet the trauma that we find, that we unleash, that we go to in my very specific way when we do, that delivered you to you being the medicine. And that medicine couldn't come in that moment. What is the medicine? A different frequency of living. But it couldn't happen then. You couldn't consciously consider it. It was too big of a picture. You just had to live through it then. But if it's coming up, we could look at it that way. And it's coming up so you could cross over that threshold and not be bound by that fear or that trauma that was caused in the first place. And so when I give them this information, then it's their work. Like, we do that work together. But then from there on out, the minute they see that theme arise in their life again, and it will, because I pull out I pull out the root, right? But there's all these other trajectory lifetimes that were sprouted the moment that wound happened, on its way seeking an understanding. But once that root is pulled, all those other timelines collapse, and they come home, and little by little, not all together, that we're in a state of grace and perfect timing. And so when that happens, we look at that and we're like, hey, I'm feeling this through my body, but I know whose that is now. I know which lifetime this comes from. And then we lovingly and quite consciously, we don't dismiss it. We don't put a happy face sticker on it. We feel it, and we're like, that goes to this lifetime with this name, this place, and that lifetime is over. And then the minute you remind yourself of that, true integration happens and true empowerment happens. And there's also a beautiful space created between you and that actual story, where before the story would just run through you and you had no sense of who you were today. And so my clients still work with them. I had one client make flashcards. It was awesome. And so she would go through those flashcards and she's like, oh my gosh, this is coming up. Okay, which past life was this? It's this one here. We don't want to deny it. She would feel it, but she'd say, I'm the medicine now. And she was able to separate it out and fully ride the wave of it in a very emotional and physical and conscious way. So it's really incredible work.
Yeah, I love the way that it's like put a name to it, right? Because it just gives us a way to have a conversation almost with our subconscious, right? In its own way. And that past life of making things unseen seen, making them real so that it makes sense, because we are still in these bodies here with brains and egos. And so part of it, trying to talk about past lives, is a bit of normalizing it, right? When you start to look at this life as part of a series of lives, you know, you could have a series of lives that were all impacted from a trauma in one life. And then that trauma in that life, I tend to think about it as, you know, what's the first life that something occurred? Well, then you've got so many branches, as you said, off
That's
that
a trajectory.
the trajectory and affects everything. And it, like, if you can this is the aspect, maybe a different aspect of the observer that Eckhart Tolle talks about. But if you can observe your life and then be willing to say, well, let me observe my past lives, right? Let me, can I play with the imagination? I was just talking with somebody about, you know, and she was sharing in a recent episode of, it was Jan, and we were talking about energy healing, sharing in a recent episode how our body doesn't know the difference between something imagined versus something that actually happened. And that's a little bit about what we're talking about with a past life, right? It's like our body, because it came forward with energy and from our Earth star and our ancestral cellular memory, our body doesn't know the difference of whether it happened in a past life, it happened in this life, it happened. Sometimes it can even be stuff we've seen on TV or read in books, right? Like some aspects trigger something and it all gets mixed together. But this process of, when we talk about being present with those moments in those past lives, and we can observe and see that web that is created, then it lets you go, because really we're trying to come back to the center of the web, right? We're trying to come back to the center of our frequency, the center of our power. And all of these things are tools that let us see that. So it's almost like allowing, I don't know, I was seeing this web of allowing the imagination. If you don't believe in past lives, it's like, well, why not? Why don't you? Right? Like, who decided that they were real for you? Was it something you learned? Like, where did that come from? Because you can go read these incredible encounters of little kids start talking about how they were killed in a past life or died in a past, like they literally are remembering, because up until about the age of 5, we have such a deep connection to the other side and it's still there. So it's like there's more and more proof. It's becoming more normalized. And so I think that's the sense that I have of, you know, it's like, I talk about past lives all the time in my family, with my friends. I mean, it's just part of our conversation. It's completely normalized at this point. I think some people think I'm crazy, but that's okay. It's like I'm planting
crazy to them, but not crazy to you.
No, and it's like, it's just planting a seed, right? How do we bring this into more normalcy, right? Because that is being willing to recognize that we're on a journey with our soul, that this human experience is one of many that's influencing our soul and our experiences. At some point, there's the opportunity to just accept that. And then in that, you can start investigating it and pursuing it and exploring it and going to the edge of it. So that's when I think about what I would want people to, you know, take away from this episode, as we've had such a beautiful time talking here. It's being open. You know, many of you listening will be like, oh yeah, I do past lives all the time. But it's like, have you become that beginner yogi who doesn't go to the edge anymore? Or are you still going to the edge? If you aren't familiar with past lives, then, you know, rather than just play it off as it's not real, I don't get it, it doesn't matter to me, just try to be open to, well, maybe that is real. What could I learn from it? Am I willing to be open? Like I used to, when I was learning spiritual techniques, I'd be like, okay, I'm going to try this on for 2 months. and I'll see how it feels. Then if I don't like it, I'll go do something else.
Hey, that's what we do. We test drive. We test drive cars. We taste test food, right?
So yeah, what is it you would love people to take away from this conversation?
That we are really ready.
Mm-hmm.
We are ready. I feel like there's a pulse out there that is really realizing that we've done everything else. We've tried everything else. You know, we've gone down those roads, but there's a craving for something more. I feel it. I mean, I've been doing this work since 1999, and I made my mystic about 7 or 8 years ago. But it isn't till today that I could actually chat with Sheila out loud. You know what I mean? And have a great conversation. So
yeah, I love that. Well, I mean, I probably could mention the number of past lives that I had to work through to be able to speak on a podcast. Holy cow. Past lives where I didn't have a voice, past lives where my voice was literally like taken away and cut out of me.
Exactly.
I mean, if I had kept a list, it's hundreds of past lives I worked with lots of friends and healers in this. Like, I was shown I needed to create a podcast, and I'm like, you have got to be kidding me.
What year are you born, if you don't mind?
1970. I'm a 70 model, as my partner would say.
Oh my God, I'm a 67 model. So there we go. Well, I'm asking you that because, you know, please excuse me, I had a little coughing fit for a minute there. Speaking of throats, I just kind of went through that chakra stuff. I'm asking you this because the 1970s generation, Pluto generation, is like Virgo. And us Plutos and Virgos, I'm Pluto and Virgo as well. It's like an every 20-year typically marker. We're healers. We're the deep healers. And the Pluto and Virgo were also slaves and servants, and things were, you know, health issues, but the slavery and the servitude, not in a healthy way. That is big trauma there. That's big trauma. And that Chiron of yours is right at those first couple degrees of Aries. My Chiron is at the 29th degree, 53 minutes on my midheaven in Pisces. There you go. But, you know, so our generation is when you go through that ability, along with the inability, and then the ability to chat and to speak. And what you're doing is you're healing that wound, not only for yourself, but for everyone. Because there was such a pulse of not having a value of self, not having an ability to have your own voice. If you're coming from that type of storyline back in the day. And so you stepping forward, because everything's energy first, your frequency is healing others. And even just like you said, I always felt weird going out there. You know, I was fine doing my work. All my clients came to me word of mouth. You know, I never advertised, but I'm here now. And not just that, but we're able to talk about it. You know, not only that it took me a while to get the courage as well, but we're able, like you and I are able to chat about this out loud. Like, how fun is that?
Right. It's amazing. It's like amazing. So
we're ready. There's a pulse out there that people are like,
it.
all right, we've tried just about everything and something still isn't right.
I love that. We're ready. That's beautiful.
They are. And this affects the nervous system. This type of past life healing, it gets your nervous system back on track, because I don't believe our identity is our name, our face, what we've done, what we didn't do. It's our nervous system. And that nervous system is very much a part of that bigger Akashic record about, you know, Aquarian. It's a pulse. It's an energy. That's where the energy lands. And so when we can put a name to these past lives, witness them, and then reprogram them, our nervous system softens. We regulate in a different way. And that's the vibe of the new world. It's how each of us are regulating ourselves, and therefore regulating all that's around us. So I feel as you said, some of the most important work we can do.
Which brings us into harmony. All of it. When you talk about the nervous system, there's a harmony.
Yes.
And that harmony is within our physical bodies, and the harmony when we come back to the full circle of being in our power and our frequency and alignment with our souls. So past life work is incredible and super powerful. So
yay.
Thank you. I do have one little thing that popped in and it keeps staying in my mind. And so I've got to share it as a closing thing just for the listeners. You brought up sommelier. And in the moment you said it, what I understood was that sommeliers, right? There's olive oil sommeliers and wine and champagne sommeliers. What I understood in that moment was they're all the people that are clairgustants. They're actually bringing in the energy of those things, right? I mean, that's what they're connecting into. It's like I saw that when they're tasting the wine, they're tasting the energy of the wine, right? Like that's cause I've always been like, where is clairgustance used, right? Like, cause I know it's a gift, but I'm like, I
love that. I love it. Well, sometimes too, I've worked with people and myself, I could actually taste certain things in my mouth when I'm I'll taste blood sometimes if it was like a bloody death or somebody or something, or they got hit and it's not there, or I'll smell cigarettes, but I want it. And I'm only bringing this up because I love to in closing, to say that when you're becoming psychic and you're really stepping into your ability, try not to limit yourself with a belief that you only have one or two of the clairs, or that you can't see dead people, or you can't read animals, because it's all energy. Everything else is just form. So let it unfold in your system and feel it where you feel it.
Yeah.
Let it tell you, don't tell it.
Yes, absolutely. Because I used to think I had no gifts. And so, I now am willing to own the clairsentient aspect and the knowing and the feeling. And I do have moments like if I ask a question and if there's a visual that I need to see, then I'll see it. But it's like, it's only if it's the only way for it to be communicated to me. It's kind of funny. Otherwise, it shows up as knowing. But I've always I'm fascinated by everyone's gifts, right? Everybody has an aspect of one or more of these gifts that exist for them. But the clairgustance, I've always struggled a little bit with that one, just from an aspect of, well, how is it used in the world? And I'm like,
what's that for?
Get it.
Oh, I see. You're like, yes, we need the chocolate sommeliers. Like,
yes. Oh, all right. Well, thank you. It has been a lot of fun trying to bring some normalcy and the readiness to past lives in this conversation. So thank you for joining me today.
You are so welcome. Thank you for having me, Sheila. That was just so much fun.
You've just listened to the Spiritual Geek Podcast. Thank you for joining us. If you've enjoyed the episode, be sure to share a comment or a rating on your favorite platform. The ratings help the podcast rise up in the ranks of the world. So everybody who can take a moment and support the podcast, it would be wonderfully appreciated. If you were inspired, consider sharing with friends and family. Love and light to each of you, and may your day be filled with joy and wisdom as you consciously create your life.